to the Insomniac Show with Nicolette and Brian. We'll get real deep with you, educating, inspiring, and solving problems with some of the most inspirational humans on the planet. Buckle up and come on the journey.
I'm excited.
Hello, everybody. I'm Nicolette, and today Brian and I are here with Renata Porter. She is a startup consultant, and she specializes in nonprofits as well. So we're going to have an interesting conversation. I have a few health club questions too, which sounds crazy in the mix of all this. So we thank you, Renata, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So why don't you kick us off by telling us a little bit about yourself and exactly, and that kind of journey to nonprofit work. I know that's an area that's near and dear to your heart.
Oh, absolutely. So I basically, in the last 7 years of my time in New Zealand, we lived in New Zealand for 10 years. And about the last 7 years of my time there, I was recruited quite heavily. I was basically I call myself a serial fixer. So I was going into all these companies and working with teams, building processes, fixing multi-million-dollar projects, teaching people how to actually run projects to get out of the methodology and just, what do you actually do? That kind of stuff. And I really loved the jumping around and working with different groups and different teams and different companies. And so when near the end of our 10 years, I was already making my way to go into consulting. But we kind of switched gears and decided we were going to move home. So we picked everything up and moved home. And I think I really underestimated how hard it would be to start a business after being out of the country for a year, especially a consulting business when you need to leverage relationships. And so it was kind of a slow start. I did work with a few startups, did some executive coaching, and it was kind of keeping me going while I was planning. And I grew up as a swimmer, full rides to universities as swimming. And one of my childhood teammates reached out to me and said, I really like what you're doing. And I kind of want to apply that rigor to my sports team. And I went, And I engaged them in that environment. And I went, oh my God, this is for me. I mean, I've always had a love for sports. I've always been in sports. I even worked in the NBA for a little bit in Seattle. Probably the worst and the best job I've ever had in my life. But I've just always had a love for sports. And so after that, I was just excited. I knew it was for me because it was, not only was it an untapped market, but I just had a blast. Because I think a lot of times that people think of profits as even the board or the people who work on nonprofits is kind of an afterthought. And I think that's kind of why a lot of them are in the position that they're in as far as lack of leadership, lack of structure, always just staying in status quo and not being able to grow, that kind of thing. So I'm all in. So I still have my RenataPorter.com as my consulting and everything, but I also have YourSportsResource.com. And I kind of work with clubs in different ways. I'm all in, or I provide a little bit of advice, or I just send them over to my other site where they can, the Your Sports Resource, where they can just gather information on their own, whatever it is, just trying to have that touch in the sports arena.
So when you talk about non-for-profits in sports, are you talking about like USA Wrestling or are you talking about those type of things, like those type of clubs?
Youth sports, yeah. So I work heavily with USA Swimming, obviously, because that's my background. Well, but I'm working with a soccer club right now too as well. So really it's just any club that's got a 501c3 that's working to put a little rigor around their organization. Because essentially it's no different than a startup, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And it's always switching people, especially those, it's like you have coaches this year.
Yeah, except there's really high turnover.
Right. Like next year it's a different coach. Yeah. I mean, because I grew up in USA Wrestling. Do you know what I mean? So I know them.
Well, that was actually, you led right into my next question. I was going to ask you, what challenges do sports clubs face that, maybe other industry areas do not,
Well, I think nonprofits by nature struggle with the fact of the high turnover of volunteers. Okay, so whether it's, your leadership of your board or just down to your regular volunteers that make meets happen or that type of thing. And I think that's the area where clubs really get in trouble, because they don't have the structure to have the onboarding and offboarding to where it's seamless. And a lot of times people spin for, because if you're on a board seat, you're there for 2 years, right? Well, if you spend 6 months trying to figure out what the heck you're supposed to be doing, that's a quarter of your time wasted, right? Where you could have just hit the ground running. So I think that's a big area right there. I think COVID was a wake-up call for a lot of clubs, and businesses as well. But I think that, recognizing that, not looking forward and not planning and not having structure, when you hit a massive event, you're unprepared to be able to manage it. And I think that clubs that are, have their structure, they know where they're going, they know what they're doing, whether they've got 10 goals or a goal, doesn't matter. A club that understands their budget and where they stand day to day, and that's a board, not just the treasurer. Everybody understands their money. Then they're much they're in a better position to actually handle something like COVID coming around, right? So, right. And I think that's a lot of clubs had a serious wake-up call, and a lot of clubs went under because they lost well over half of their membership. I mean, people were trying to watch their money. They had no idea what was happening. So, especially those people who had their children in 5 and 6 different sports, which I find crazy. I mean, when I was growing up, if you were in 2 sports, that was nutty. And now it's like they're in so many different things, which I get, they need to be active. But so when they're doing that, they're making the decision of, okay, my child doesn't need to be on 5 teams. Maybe we just look at 1, so clubs had to be able to deal with that and react with that. And some clubs did great, and some clubs not so much. The doors are shut.
Hey, you mentioned growing up and doing multiple sports. Like I played every sport, every season, so I was in literally everything you could think of, right? I think the only thing I didn't play was football, literally, as a youth. And what's interesting is it was very different. Now, parents are required to bring their kids everywhere, where previously it was meet at the school, drop off your kid, and whoever was responsible would get them in a van or your bus or whatever it was and bring them. And it was much different, where now it almost you can't, because parentally, you don't have as much time, right? You can't even expose your kids to some of these other sports because it's just how do you get exposed to all of them? You figure out which ones are actually really for you.
Right, exactly. I'm really safe in a position to be, there's a lot of trust to be able to have your kid do a carpool or something like that. I mean, there's more personal stuff going on to where, there's trust factors, which is another reason why if a board is well organized and they're on the same page as their coaches, and their coaches and the board are really working together to have great outcomes. And what happens is your membership knows that the leadership of the organization is going in a great direction and that they handle problems. And then, it just kind of builds that trust to where people are feeling more comfortable. They love their coaches. They love the competitions that they're going to. They know that their membership funds are being used wisely. And I think a club in that position is going to gain that athlete or, that family that's kind of trying to make those decisions, And when they get older, not only because they have time or don't have time, but, a lot of parents or families are thinking about university, and then, okay, so we probably need to focus our kid in a sport. What sport is that? So they might actually be able to get on a team at university, maybe get some financial aid or, a scholarship or whatever it may be. So again, you want to be the club that pulls that trust factor. And there's so many things that are involved in that, So.
Well, I mean, you mentioned the leadership and meeting everybody on the same page. What would you consider? How do you build a team with great leadership then? I mean, how do you do that?
Yeah, I think there's 2 sides of that, right? I think the biggest problem that clubs face today is recruiting the right volunteers. I think a lot of clubs, a lot of nonprofits, and I was a president of a diabetes youth organization in New Zealand, right? And I mean, I'll be honest, I took the position because nobody else would step into it, right? So I totally understand that a lot of times people bring volunteers on board on the board or any major volunteer role because somebody volunteered. Doesn't matter if they have the skill set or not, right? So, and I think that's where the problems come into play, because I think if you want to take your organization seriously, there's some roles that passion is all of it, right? There's some roles that you actually have to have somebody who has the skill set and the capability to be able to either do the activity or oversee the activity with a subcommittee, whatever that may be, right? So I think that a lot of times one of the biggest problems is they don't go and shoulder tap for the right positions. And I think the other side of it is then they don't get on the same page with the coach. And that's on both sides, right? I see so many clubs that are parent-led, not coach-led, parent-led, that they don't include the coaches in the conversations. They're not in the board meetings. And that's not only with the board, that's the coaches like, I don't care about the board. I don't care about what they have to say. So you got two groups of leadership that are going in two different, potentially, most likely going into two different directions, right? Whereas the board should be supporting the coach, right? So let's use swimming as an example, and let's use COVID as an example, right? So a lot of clubs had to stop swimming, or they had to spread out their teams. So there weren't that many people practicing, which meant you had to secure more pools, right? So in order to do that, the board should have been out there helping the coach or doing it for them, look for more pools and supporting them so they could still conduct practice, not leave that to the coach to do when they're still trying to manage, all their swimmers or their athletes under stressful situations. I mean, they had to rethink too, like, okay, if I can't get in a pool, what am I doing? And a lot of people went to Zoom practices or Facebook practices, and that was great for camaraderie, but it was stressful for them because it was very different, and they had to think out of the box. So if you don't have a board that's actually supporting moving forward, then you just get a team that stands still. There's arguing, there's bickering. It's a lot of the problems in clubs right now is because everybody feels that they have to be right instead of thinking about the evolution of the organization and what's best for the membership.
Right. Or even the sport, you see this in various sports. We talk about all the time, like judo is a really interesting example of a sport where they just keep changing the rule set. So it's definitely interesting how you see it. But here's my question, especially with, these younger athlete sports, right? Do you find, because you mentioned parents, right? And I've seen this with my own kids growing up. You find there's a lot of over parent involvement versus letting the coaches do what they need to do. And then what happens is when the parents, their kids graduate on to whatever, now they're in high school sports, those organizations start falling apart. So the parents almost put a demise sometimes to some of these non-for-profits, thinking they're, for whatever reason, thinking they're doing the right thing, or they just need to be in control, or whatever the case is. But they wind up adding some demise to these, non-for-profits.
Yeah, and I think that's where the organization itself, the coach and the board, need to come together and create a parent handbook, and they need to make sure it's realistic and then enforce it. Right? If you don't want a parent stepping out on the mat, then you make sure that that's the rules and they don't step out on the mat. Right.
Right.
I was in Taekwondo for quite a few years. So black belt myself. So and when I had to step in and coach, that's part of the requirement as you move up, is that when you coach, and I can't tell you how many parents thought it was okay for them to step out on the mat. And I'm like, oh my God, so disrespectful.
Well, it just freaks me out when people put their shoes on the mat. I go like, it makes me completely bonkers.
I think the structure is what's important. Right. So, and I think people are so afraid to develop a structure and stick to the structure for whatever reason. And I think it's the messaging behind it. Right. So if you want your child to come and learn judo, let them come and learn judo.
Right.
you go home and you manage your child at home, right? Now we may need you as a volunteer to help get them to competitions or whatever it may be, back and forth to practice. So I think like having that structure, there's a way to do it to not be rude,
Right.
but upholding the integrity of the sport and the learning atmosphere for that child. And I think, the other area of that parent handbook needs to be, listen, this is just sports in general is such a huge opportunity, whether your child is an elite athlete or just learning, emerging athlete, it doesn't matter. It's a huge opportunity for your child to learn how to engage and communicate, how to be structured. They got to get their stuff organized, quit putting their bag together. I'm probably crossing the lines. That's really not what I get into,
Right.
but quit putting their bag together. Let them do it. Right.
With you.
But that's all the things that like really set children up for success, whether they're going to be an elite athlete or not. Letting them be involved is key and crucial, which again is another area where just rigor needs to be in place. And the board and the coach need to come together on what that parent structure is and that parent guideline is, and they need to support each other. So if somebody oversteps the bounds and the coach calls them on it, the board can't fold. They need to support them or her, right?
Because you see that so many times, like parents, they get so crazy over things. It's like, let the coach do their job or let the, event unfold the way the event's going to unfold, I don't know. I mean, the mere fact that you're putting your child in a sport, there's always risk, you have to back up a little bit,
And and also have ways to where if there really is a problem with a coach, there needs to be avenues of feedback, right? So that way the parent can feel secure in letting their child go and spend an hour and a half, 30 minutes, whatever it is with that coach. But if something seems off or out of line, there needs to be a really strong communication line to where they can provide that feedback. And then either the board or the head coach can go, okay, I probably should have a conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
I know we're talking about sports, but there was something interesting I had read, Renata, and I really wanted to ask you about this. There was an article on your website, and it was about hiring for a skill or teaching a skill. And I wanted to talk a little bit about that.
Sure.
Because I think that's a really cool concept, and I mean, Brian, you and I, we talk about this all the time, right? Do you somebody who's already got the skills, or do we want somebody that we can teach,
Right. Do you want someone that's motivated, someone that's excited, someone that, someone that's interested,
right?
Someone that's smart,
that's it right there.
Or whatever, or active, or
you can't teach passion. You can't teach integrity. You can't teach if you have a set of values for your organization, it's kind of hard to teach those. People either match up or they don't, right? So a lot of times, depending on what the role is, I will tell people to go for the passion and go for the integrity, go for the person who's going to speak up and say they did something wrong versus the person who's going to hide, right? And when I wrote that article, it was more about how I would, because I would float from company to company, I would find that a lot of times, instead of taking the person who's been within the organization for 5 or 6 years, who's got all that institutional knowledge about how the organization works and who the players are, who the customers are, whatever it may be, instead of like moving them up the ladder and teaching them a new school so they can bring all that knowledge with them, they'll go out and hire somebody new who's coming in, who thinks they're going to change the world and really doesn't have any of that institutional knowledge. Now, listen, there's certain roles you have to have that skill set, right? There's that high technical roles, whatever they may be. But a lot of times I would see companies just pass over somebody who's been killing it for 6 years for them, like really doing a great job, meeting all their objectives, KPIs, just successful all over the place, bring with them all kinds of knowledge about their customer base. And they totally pass them over for somebody else when instead of looking internally. That's kind of why I wrote that article. But I think there's always a good balance of hiring someone who's going to fit with your organization culturally probably should take precedence over someone who's really got a skill set, because even if they have the skill set, if they don't have the passion, they're not going to deliver. And this is a big thing that I talk about with sports, right? So just because somebody does accounting and you pull them on to be the club treasurer, if they don't care about your club, they may say, right? But if they don't care about your membership in your club, they're always going to be late. They may be inaccurate. So what value are they actually providing, right? So you have to make sure that people actually want to do the job. They take their role seriously. They have the passion to do it. And then you kind of tack on the skill set on top of that. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, you did. I like that. I like that perspective.
Cool.
I do. Well, Renata, I would like to wrap up with the last question.
Sure.
What is your advice for leaders right now in any organization?
I think in any organization, leadership, anybody can be a leader. Okay. And it doesn't matter if you're at the top of the organization, if you're a middle manager, or if you're just, an employee that has no direct reports, right? I think everybody really needs to consider why they're there and take that role seriously. Okay. And I think, especially now when people are burnt out, they're tired, there's so much emotional insecurity, because we're coming up to, a year and a half, maybe, I don't even know, 2 years of this turmoil with COVID, and it doesn't look like it's going to end anytime soon. I think that people are they're emotionally tired. So I think people need to consider that for themselves and say, okay, so why am I here today? What am I doing today? And if I relate that to a leader in a sports organization, whether it's the coach or the board, it's time for you to take your seat seriously. One thing it really freaks me out about board members is they don't recognize that they're on the hook if something goes wrong. They're going to jail. They're going in the paper. They don't take it seriously. It's an afterthought, So if somebody's really abusing their time, abusing money, abusing athletes, they're on the hook for not doing the right things. And I really want board members, if you're in that seat, it's time to take it seriously. Do something today. What can you do to affect your membership? What can you do to put things in the right place, right? Even if there's no structure and your president's not all that great at leadership, what can you do today to move your club forward, right? And I think, just sitting down and saying that, I'm going to allocate 5 hours a week and I'm just going to move like, okay, so I have a horrible board, but for me, maybe I can put some structure in place in this, right? And I think if everybody just starts taking a step forward, things will just kind of happen, right? And I think for a board member, if you're not there for a reason and you're not there to serve your membership, you're just there for the seat and the title, move on.
I was about to ask that.
Someone else who actually wants to be there and will fill that seat and serve their membership, right? I think if I were to relate it to Upstarts, right? Entrepreneurs have that stress level already. And I think going through what everybody's been going through for the last year, I just want to tell people to have, you might have to pare back. You might have to think smart. You might have to do a couple different roles. But I think understanding that focusing on where you're going and what you're doing, putting one foot in front of the other is still the right way to go. And I know it's hard emotionally because a lot of people just get wrapped up into their business and what's going to happen. Nobody's working. How am I going to do this? And I think you just got to find that way and think kind of, you might need to think very differently. So, and that's what I help people with a lot, whether it's, like I said, I'm either all in and I'm like really restructuring their organization and helping them do their strategic goals, or am I just there on a light touch going, okay, let me see what you're doing about this little piece of work. Oh, okay. Yeah, you could do this. So and that's how I operate. I'm either, I work with organizations and businesses where they need the help instead of trying to sell in a big program of work. That's not my thing. I mean, I want to get in and I want to make actionable improvements. Like if my advice works for you, great, put it into action, have some success immediately. Cause that makes me feel good. I'm not there to do a methodology and let me sell you 80 hours for me just to talk at you for 80 hours.
Right. So how detrimental is it, like when, because you see these people who are just like political machines and they just want that board seat or whatever it is, whether it's in a company or these sports things, it seems, versus people who, because it seems like there's so many people, I guess this is my question. It seems like there's so many people who want the title, but they don't want the responsibility, right? Or what comes with it. And how detrimental is that to companies when they wind up putting people like that in place?
Oh, I mean, I think everybody could answer that question for themselves. I think everybody's been in a position where they look around and they go, excuse my language, but shit rises to the top. How the hell is that? How does that happen after time and time and time again? How do people get in positions that they have no business being in, right? And that's because they get hired because they're liked, and again, that just goes right back to, why are you not looking at people who actually have the passion for the position and can bring success? And I think people are very narrow-minded. They don't think about their staff. Like a happy, well-engaged staff are always going to produce. And people have been talking about this for hundreds and hundreds of years. This is not new knowledge, right? But your happy and engaged staff are the ones who are going to make you successful and deliver. And everybody feels valued. Everybody feels good about their contribution and the work they're doing. And that is no different whether you're in a volunteer role or a high-paying paid role or a cashier at a grocery store. It doesn't matter what position you're in. If you are an employee that feels valued or a volunteer that feels valued, you're going to give back and you're going to do more, right? And all I can say about those organizations that constantly are putting the wrong people in place and rubbing everybody the wrong way, I mean, they end up in a demise in their own way, right? Eventually, staff will start backing out. And I think, another thing, a side effect with COVID is I think people are starting to recognize their value and where they should be spending their time. And I think senior management, probably worldwide, are going to have a big wake-up call. When we start getting back to normal, whatever that normal is, and going back to work, staff aren't going to tolerate the crap anymore. They're not going to tolerate it. They'll go find a job somewhere else where somebody values them and what they have to offer. So.
Well, Renata, thank you so much for
no problem.
sharing with us today. We would love if you could let us know where everybody can learn more about you. I know you have your sports resource as well, so please let everybody know, and we'll put the links down in the description so everybody can get there easily.
Okay, so you can reach out to me on renataporter.com. That's really the consulting side of my business. And then I started a new site called yoursportsresource.com, which is a membership site where it's really affordable. It's just a way for clubs to go in and get information, get articles. There's webinars, there's on-demand courses where you can just go in and learn. And that's for the leadership of organizations. And if you, I did do a bonus piece for anybody who's listening today. If they want to learn how to find the right volunteers and retain volunteers, it's yoursportsresource.com/bonus, and they can get that for free. So yeah, you can find me on either site, or you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm Renata Porter. So
awesome. Thank you so much, Renata. We really appreciate your time today.
No problem. Thank you.